The emergency meeting had been going on for 3 hours, and Robert Chen was running out of patience. As the CEO of TechFlow Industries, he had seen plenty of crises, but nothing quite like this. The company's main server system had been acting up for 2 weeks straight, causing delays, lost data, and frustrated clients. What made it worse was that nobody could figure out what was wrong. "So let me get this straight," Robert said, loosening his tie as he looked around the crowded conference room. "We've brought in 12 different specialists, spent over $200,000, and we're still nowhere close to a solution?" The IT director, Patricia Wong, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "The system keeps crashing every few hours. We've tried everything: new hardware, software updates, security patches. The specialists from IBM came in last week, followed by the team from Microsoft. Even the independent consultants we hired can't pinpoint the issue." Robert rubbed his temples. TechFlow Industries wasn't just any company. They provided cloud services to over 3,000 small businesses across the country. When their system went down, thousands of people couldn't access their data, run their point-of-sale systems, or manage their inventory. The pressure was mounting, and clients were starting to jump ship. "What about the team from California?" Robert asked, referring to the latest group of experts who had flown in that morning. "They're still running diagnostics," Patricia replied. "But they seem just as puzzled as everyone else. The system works perfectly for a few hours, then suddenly crashes without any warning signs. The problem had started 2 weeks ago on a Monday morning. Employees began reporting that they couldn't access certain files. By noon, half the system was down. By evening, everything had crashed. The technical team worked through the night to get things running again, and by Tuesday morning, everything seemed fine. But then it happened again on Wednesday and Thursday, and every day since then the pattern was maddening. The system would run smoothly for anywhere between 2 to 6 hours, then suddenly shut down completely. No error messages, no warning signs, nothing that would give the technicians a clue about what was going wrong. It was like the server just decided to take a nap whenever it felt like it. Robert had spent sleepless nights trying to figure out what to do. The company's reputation was on the line. Some of their biggest clients had already started making noise about switching to competitors. The financial losses were piling up, not just from the consultant fees but from the business they were losing every day. "Sir," Patricia continued, "I have to be honest with you. At this point, we might need to consider completely rebuilding our entire system from scratch. It would take months and cost us over $1 million, but it might be our only option." The thought made Robert's stomach turn. A complete rebuild would mean months of downtime, massive costs, and likely the end of TechFlow Industries as they knew it. Most of their clients wouldn't wait around for months while they got their act together. As the meeting dragged on, Robert found himself looking out the large windows of the conference room. The office building was mostly empty now. It was past 7 in the evening, and most employees had gone home. He could see the cleaning crew starting their evening routine, pushing their carts through the hallways and getting ready to clean each office. That's when he noticed Eddie Rodriguez, the night janitor who had been working at TechFlow for the past 8 years. Eddie was probably in his 50s, a quiet man who came in every evening at 6 and worked until 2 in the morning. He always wore the same navy blue uniform and carried himself with a dignity that Robert had always respected. Eddie never complained, never caused drama, and never asked for anything more than his fair paycheck. What struck Robert as odd was that Eddie seemed to be paying attention to their meeting. Most cleaning staff would just do their job and move on, but Eddie appeared to be lingering near the conference room, occasionally glancing through the glass walls as he slowly wiped down surfaces that already looked clean. "The bottom line," said Dr. Harrison, the latest specialist they had brought in from Boston, "is that your system has some kind of intermittent failure that we can't replicate or predict. Without being able to reproduce the problem consistently, it's nearly impossible to fix it." Robert felt his frustration boiling over. "So what you're telling me is that 12 specialists, each charging us thousands of dollars per day, can't solve a problem that a medium-sized company is facing with its basic server setup?" The room fell silent. The truth was uncomfortable, but it was the truth nonetheless. Despite all the expertise, all the expensive diagnostic tools, and all the different approaches they had tried, the problem remained as mysterious as ever. That's when something caught Robert's eye. Eddie was still there, and now he seemed to be shaking his head slightly as if he disagreed with something he had overheard. Robert found this curious. What would a janitor know about complex server issues that a team of experts couldn't figure out? "Let's take a break," Robert announced suddenly. "Everyone, please step out for 15 minutes. Get some coffee, stretch your legs. We'll reconvene and try to come up with a new approach." As the specialists and company executives filed out of the room, Robert noticed that Eddie was now cleaning just outside the conference room door. He was moving slowly, methodically wiping down the water cooler and organizing the small seating area nearby. Robert had always prided himself on treating every employee with respect, regardless of their position. He regularly chatted with people from all departments, from the executive assistants to the security guards. But Eddie was different. He was so quiet and unassuming that their conversations had never gone beyond basic pleasantries. Now, though, Robert found himself genuinely curious. He had built TechFlow Industries from the ground up over 15 years, starting with just 3 employees in a small rented office. He had learned early on that sometimes the best insights came from unexpected places. Some of his most valuable business ideas had come from casual conversations with employees who saw things from different perspectives. The server room was on the same floor as the conference room, just down the hall. Robert had been in and out of there dozens of times over the past 2 weeks, watching the various specialists run their tests and scratch their heads in confusion. The room was always kept at a precise temperature, with multiple backup systems and monitoring equipment that cost more than most people's cars. As Robert sat alone in the conference room, looking at all the charts and diagnostic reports spread across the table, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something obvious. Sometimes the most complex problems had the simplest solutions, but everyone was so focused on the technical aspects that they couldn't see the forest for the trees. He glanced at his watch. The break was almost over, and soon the room would be full, again, of expensive consultants with their expensive theories and expensive solutions that didn't work. Little did Robert know that the answer to his $200,000 problem was standing just outside his door, quietly emptying trash cans and thinking about things that 12 specialists had somehow managed to overlook completely. Robert decided to do something he had never done before in 15 years of running the company. Instead of waiting for his expensive consultants to come back with more theories that probably wouldn't work, he walked out of the conference room and approached Eddie directly. "Excuse me." "Eddie," Robert said, his voice carrying a mix of desperation and curiosity. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but I couldn't help but notice you seemed interested in our discussion about the server problems." Eddie looked up from his cleaning cart, surprised that the CEO was talking to him about something other than the weather or weekend plans. His weathered hands paused on the handle of his mop, and for a moment, he seemed unsure whether he should speak up or just politely excuse himself. "Well, Mr. Chen," Eddie said slowly, "I don't want to overstep any boundaries. I know I'm just here to clean the offices. Eddie, right now I'm willing to listen to anyone who might have an idea. We've spent more money on consultants in the past 2 weeks than most people make in 5 years. And we're no closer to solving this problem than when we started." Eddie glanced around the hallway, making sure they were alone. "I've been working nights here for 8 years. I clean that server room every single night, and I've been watching what's been happening lately." Robert felt a spark of hope. "What have you noticed?" "Well," Eddie continued, "I don't know much about computers and all that technical stuff, but I do know about patterns. In my line of work, you notice patterns. Which offices get messy at the same times each day? When certain equipment starts acting up, things like that." This wasn't what Robert had expected, but something in Eddie's tone made him want to hear more. "What kind of patterns have you noticed?" Eddie set down his mop and pulled a small notepad from his shirt pocket. Robert was amazed to see that it was filled with dates, times, and short notes written in neat handwriting. "I started keeping track after the 3rd day of problems," Eddie explained. "Every night when I clean the server room, I write down what time it is and whether the system is running or not. I also note anything unusual I see." Robert looked at the notepad, scanning the INNI. Tries. Monday, 11:30 p.m. System down. All lights flashing red. Tuesday, 10:45 p.m. System running normal. Wednesday, 12:15 a.m. System down again. The entries went on like this for 2 weeks. This is incredible. "Eddie, you've been tracking this more carefully than our IT department." "That's not all," Eddie said, flipping to another page. "I also started paying attention to other things happening in the building around the times when the system crashes." Robert's pulse quickened. None of the specialists had thought to look at environmental factors or building-wide patterns. They had all focused purely on the technical side. What did you find? Eddie pointed to his notes. The crashes don't happen randomly. They always happen between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., which is when I'm here cleaning. But more importantly, they seem to happen on the same nights when other things go wrong in the building. What do you mean, other things? Well, some nights the elevator gets stuck between floors for a few minutes. Some nights the lights in the east wing flicker. Some nights the air conditioning system makes weird noises. I noticed that on those same nights your server system crashes. Robert stared at Eddie in amazement. You think there's a connection? I'm not sure, Eddie admitted. But in 8 years of working here, I've learned that when multiple things start acting up at the same time, it's usually because they're all connected to the same problem. This was a completely different way of thinking about the issue. All the specialists had been looking at the server system in isolation, trying to find problems with the hardware or software. None of them had considered that the issue might be related to the building's infrastructure. Eddie, this might be the breakthrough we've been looking for. Can you tell me more about these other problems you've noticed? Eddie seemed to gain confidence as he realized Robert was taking him seriously. The elevator thing happens maybe once or twice a week. It gets stuck for about 5 minutes, then works fine again. The maintenance company says there's nothing wrong with it. The light flickering happens in different parts of the building, but always at night. And the air conditioning, well, that's been making strange humming noises lately, but only sometimes. Have you reported any of this? I mentioned the elevator to the building maintenance supervisor, and I told the security guard about the lights. But everyone just said it was old building problems and not to worry about it. Robert felt like puzzle pieces were starting to come together in his mind. Eddie, I need to ask you something important. When you're cleaning the server room, have you ever noticed anything about the power situation? Eddie's eyes lit up. That's exactly what I was thinking about. The server room has all those fancy battery backup systems and surge protectors, right? But what if the problem isn't with the servers themselves? What if something is causing power fluctuations throughout the entire building? Robert couldn't believe what he was hearing. A janitor with an 8th grade education was proposing a theory that 12 specialists with advanced degrees had completely missed. The thing is, Eddie continued, I've worked in a lot of buildings over the years before coming here. Old buildings like this one sometimes have electrical problems that are hard to track down. The wiring might be fine most of the time, but under certain conditions, maybe when there's extra demand on the system, or when the weather affects things, you get these brief power fluctuations. But wouldn't our monitoring equipment detect power problems? Not necessarily, Eddie said. If the fluctuations are very brief or if they're not big enough to trigger the monitoring systems, they might go unnoticed. But they could still be enough to confuse the servers and cause them to crash. Robert looked back toward the conference room, where millions of dollars worth of consulting expertise was about to reconvene to discuss more complex theories about software bugs and hardware failures. Meanwhile, a night janitor was suggesting that the problem might be something as basic as the building's electrical system. Eddie, would you be willing to share this theory with the specialists? I know it might seem intimidating, but your observations could be exactly what we need. Eddie hesitated. Mr. Chen, I'm not sure they'd want to listen to someone like me. These are important people with fancy degrees and expensive equipment. I'm just a guy who mops floors and empties trash cans. Eddie, let me tell you something I've learned in 15 years of running this company. The most valuable insights often come from people who see things differently, who notice details that others miss. You've been observing our system more carefully than anyone else, and you're thinking about it in a way that no one else has considered. Robert paused, then continued. Besides, we're desperate. We've tried everything else and nothing has worked. What do we have to lose? Just then, Patricia Wong appeared at the end of the hallway. Mr. Chen, we're ready to reconvene. Dr. Harrison thinks he might have a new approach to try. Robert looked at Eddie, then back at Patricia. In that moment, he made a decision that would either solve their biggest crisis or make him look foolish in front of a room full of experts. Patricia, I want you to meet Eddie Rodriguez. He's been working here for 8 years, and he has a theory about our server problems that I think everyone needs to hear. Patricia looked confused, glancing between Robert and Eddie. I'm sorry, but I don't understand. He's on the cleaning staff, yes he is, and he might just be the person who saves our company. Walking back into that conference room was one of the most uncomfortable moments in Eddie's life. The long table was surrounded by people in expensive suits, laptops open, technical diagrams spread everywhere. Dr. Harrison from Boston sat at one end with his thick glasses and perfectly pressed shirt. The Microsoft consultants had their sleeves rolled up, looking frustrated. The IBM team was huddled around a tablet, probably running another diagnostic test that would tell them nothing new. Robert cleared his throat to get everyone's attention. Before we continue, I want to introduce someone who has been observing our situation from a different perspective. This is Eddie Rodriguez, and he has some insights that I think we all need to hear. The room fell silent. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward Eddie, and he could practically feel their confusion. He was still wearing his navy blue janitor uniform, holding his small notepad with the handwritten observations that suddenly seemed so simple compared to all the high-tech equipment around him. Dr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and spoke first. I'm sorry, but I'm not sure I understand. We're dealing with a very complex server architecture problem here. I don't see how— Please, Robert interrupted. Just hear him out. Eddie, tell them what you told me. Eddie's mouth felt dry, but he looked around the room and began to speak. I've been cleaning this building for 8 years, and I work the night shift when most of these crashes happen. I started keeping track of when the servers go down, and I noticed something that might be important. He opened his notepad and placed it on the table. Some of the consultants leaned forward to look, while others sat back with skeptical expressions. The crashes don't happen randomly, Eddie continued. They always happen between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., and they seem to happen on the same nights when other things go wrong in the building. The elevator gets stuck, lights flicker in different parts of the building, and the air conditioning makes strange noises. Patricia Wong looked puzzled. I'm not sure I see the connection. Our server room has independent power systems, battery backups, and surge protection. That's what I thought too, Eddie said, gaining a bit more confidence. But what if the problem isn't with the servers themselves? What if something is causing brief power fluctuations throughout the whole building? Fluctuations that are small enough to not trigger your monitoring systems, but big enough to confuse the servers. One of the IBM consultants, a woman named Dr. Lisa Park, shook her head. We've monitored the power supply extensively. Our equipment would detect any significant fluctuations. But what about very brief ones? Eddie asked. Like just for a few seconds? I've worked in old buildings before, and sometimes they have electrical issues that are hard to catch. Dr. Harrison looked annoyed. With all due respect, modern server monitoring systems are extremely sensitive. If there were power issues, we would know about it. Robert could see that Eddie was starting to feel intimidated, but he also noticed something interesting. A few of the younger technicians in the room were actually paying attention, nodding slightly as Eddie spoke. Eddie, Robert said, tell them about the timing patterns you've noticed. Eddie flipped through his notepad. The crashes happen most often on Tuesday and Thursday nights. That's also when the elevator problems are worst, and when I've noticed the most issues with lights flickering. One of the Microsoft consultants, a guy who looked to be in his 30s, suddenly sat up straighter. Wait a minute. Tuesday and Thursday nights. Aren't those the nights when the building's industrial laundry service runs their big commercial washers in the basement? The room went quiet. Eddie nodded enthusiastically. Yes, I forgot to mention that. The laundry company comes in twice a week to wash all the uniforms for the security company, the cleaning service, and the restaurant downstairs. They bring these huge commercial washing machines and set them up in the basement. Dr. Park looked thoughtfully. Oh, commercial washing machines draw enormous amounts of power, especially during the spin cycles. And this building is from the 1970s, Patricia added slowly. The electrical system might not be designed to handle that kind of sudden power draw. Robert felt his heart racing. Are you saying that industrial washing machines in the basement could be causing our server crashes? Dr. Harrison still looked skeptical. It seems unlikely. The power load should be on completely different circuits. But the younger Microsoft consultant was already pulling out his phone. Actually, in older buildings, the electrical distribution isn't always as separated as you'd think. If the main electrical panel can't handle the sudden power draw from commercial equipment, it could cause voltage drops throughout the entire building. Eddie felt encouraged by the support. That's exactly what I was thinking. The washing machines probably start up around 10 p.m., and they run for several hours. The crashes happen when the machines are running their heaviest cycles. One of the local technicians that TechFlow employed spoke up. I hate to admit this, but we never thought to check what other electrical loads were running in the building when the crashes occurred. We were so focused on the server room itself. Dr. Park was now typing quickly on her laptop. If this theory is correct, we should be able to test it pretty easily. We can monitor the building's main electrical panel during the next laundry service night, and we can also check with the building management about the electrical load distribution. Robert turned to Patricia. When is the laundry service scheduled to come in next? Patricia checked her phone. Tomorrow is Thursday. They should be here around 10 p.m. Perfect, said Dr. Park. We can set up monitoring equipment on the main electrical panel and see what happens when those washing machines kick. And Dr. Harrison still seemed reluctant to accept such a simple explanation. Even if there are power fluctuations, our servers have multiple protection systems. Battery backups, voltage regulators, surge protectors. But what if the fluctuations are happening in a way that the protection systems don't recognize as a threat? Asked the young Microsoft consultant. Like, what if it's not a traditional power surge or outage, but rather a series of micro fluctuations that happen too quickly for the protection systems to respond? Eddie nodded. That's exactly what I was thinking. It's like when you're driving on a bumpy road. Each individual bump isn't big enough to damage your car, but if you hit enough of them in a row, something might come loose. The room was warming up to the theory now. Even some of the more skeptical consultants were starting to ask practical questions about how they could test it. The beautiful thing about this theory, said Patricia, is that it's actually testable. We don't need to spend weeks running more diagnostics on the servers themselves. We can just monitor what's happening with the building's electrical system. Robert looked around the room and saw something he hadn't seen in 2 weeks. Genuine optimism. For the first time since this whole crisis began, they had a theory that made sense and could be tested quickly. Eddie, Robert said, I think you might have just saved our company. How do you feel about staying late tomorrow night to help us test your theory? Eddie smiled, still hardly believing that a room full of experts was taking his observations seriously. Mr. Chen, I'll stay as late as you need me to. Thursday night felt different from any other night in TechFlow Industries' 15-year history. Instead of an empty building with just Eddie quietly doing his cleaning rounds, the entire server room was buzzing with activity. Dr. Park and her team had set up monitoring equipment throughout the building, with cables running from the basement electrical panel all the way up to the server room on the 3rd floor. Robert had never stayed this late at the office before, but he wasn't about to miss what could be the most important night in his company's history. He sat in the server room, watching multiple computer screens that showed electrical readings, server performance data, and building system status. The room hummed with the sound of cooling fans and electronic equipment. Eddie arrived at his usual time, 6 p.m., but instead of starting his regular cleaning routine, he joined the team of specialists who were preparing for the night's investigation. It felt surreal to him. Just 24 hours ago, he was invisible to most people in the building. Now he was being treated as an essential part of solving the company's biggest crisis. The laundry service should arrive around 10 p.m., Patricia announced, checking her watch. Their typical routine is to set up the commercial washers in the basement storage area and run them for about 3 hours. Dr. Park was calibrating her monitoring equipment. We've got sensors on the main electrical panel, the server room's dedicated power line, and backup power systems. If there are any fluctuations, no matter how brief, we'll catch them. The young Microsoft consultant who had introduced himself as Kevin was setting up a separate monitoring system. I've also installed some additional logging software on the servers themselves. If they start to malfunction, we'll have a detailed record of exactly what happens and when. As the evening progressed, the team settled into a tense waiting period. The servers were running normally, all systems showed green lights, and the building was quiet except for the usual hum of air conditioning and electronic equipment. Eddie went about some of his regular duties, but he kept checking back with the team. In my experience, he told them, the problems usually start about an hour after the laundry people begin working. That's when they move from the lighter wash cycles to the heavy-duty cleaning and the high-speed spinning. Robert found himself impressed by Eddie's methodical thinking. Here was a man who had learned to observe patterns and think systematically, even though he had never received formal training in problem-solving or technical analysis. At 9:45 p.m., they heard the service elevator in the basement. The laundry team had arrived right on schedule, wheeling in their commercial-grade washing equipment. "Here we go," Dr. Park said, her eyes fixed on the monitoring screens. For the first hour, everything looked normal. The electrical readings showed typical nighttime power consumption for the building. The servers continued running smoothly, processing data and responding to requests from clients across the country. "Maybe the theory is wrong," Dr. Harrison said quietly. He had been somewhat convinced by the previous day's discussion, but he was still skeptical that something so simple could have stumped so many experts. "Give it time," Eddie replied calmly. "The pattern I've noticed usually starts around 11 p.m., when they switch to the heavy-duty cycles." At 11:03 p.m., one of Dr. Park's monitors began showing small spikes in electrical activity. Nothing dramatic, just brief fluctuations that lasted only a few seconds at a time. "There," Kevin pointed at his screen. "Did you see that?" The server response time just hiccuped for about 3 seconds. Everyone gathered around the monitors. The electrical readings showed a pattern of small power fluctuations, not big enough to trigger any alarms, but definitely present. And each time a fluctuation occurred, the server performance data showed a corresponding tiny disruption. "It's like Eddie described," Dr. Park said with growing excitement. "Individual bumps that aren't big enough to cause major problems, but when they happen repeatedly, they start to accumulate." At 11:17 p.m., the washing machines in the basement shifted into high-speed spin cycles. The electrical monitors went crazy, showing rapid fluctuations as the heavy machinery drew power in bursts. On the server monitors, warning lights began flashing. System response times started climbing. Error messages began appearing in the log files. "This is it," Robert said, his voice filled with amazement and relief. "Eddie, you were absolutely right. But the real proof came at 11:23 p.m., when the servers crashed completely, just as they had been doing for the past 2 weeks. But this time, instead of being a mysterious failure that no one could explain, it was a documented event with clear cause and effect." "Look at this," Kevin called out, pointing to his screen. The power fluctuation started at 11:03. The server performance began degrading at 11:05, and complete system failure occurred at 11:23. "We have a perfect timeline of how the problem develops." Dr. Park was already formulating solutions. "Now that we know what's causing it, this is actually a pretty straightforward fix. We need to install proper electrical isolation for the server room. Maybe add some additional voltage regulation equipment. The building's electrical system needs to be upgraded to handle the variable loads better." Eddie felt a mixture of pride and relief. After 2 weeks of watching the company struggle with this problem, seeing the frustrated faces of his co-workers, and knowing that people's livelihoods depended on getting it fixed, he finally felt like he had contributed something meaningful. "Eddie," Robert said, putting a hand on the janitor's shoulder, "I owe you an apology, and I owe you a debt of gratitude. We all do. You solved a problem that stumped 12 specialists because you took the time to observe, to think, and to see the bigger picture." Dr. Harrison, who had been the most skeptical, walked over to Eddie. "I have to admit, I was wrong to dismiss your theory. Sometimes the simplest explanations are the right ones, and sometimes the most important insights come from unexpected places." As the laundry equipment continued running in the basement, the MAE team spent the rest of the night documenting their findings and planning the solution. The electrical upgrades would cost about $20,000, a fraction of what they had already spent on consultants, and a tiny amount compared to what a complete system rebuild would have cost. More importantly, they could implement the fix over a weekend, with minimal disruption to their clients. No months-long system rebuild, no massive business losses, no company-ending crisis. As dawn approached, Eddie looked around the server room at all the specialists who were now treating him as a colleague, rather than just the guy who emptied their trash cans. It had been the most unusual night of his working life, but also one of the most satisfying. Robert was already thinking beyond just fixing the immediate problem. Watching Eddie's systematic approach to observation and problem-solving had given him ideas about how the company could benefit from different perspectives and ways of thinking. The crisis that had threatened to destroy TechFlow Industries was finally over, thanks to a janitor who paid attention to details that everyone else had missed. The weekend after the electrical discovery was unlike any other weekend in TechFlow Industries history. Instead of the usual empty building, Teams of electricians worked around the clock to install new voltage regulation equipment and proper electrical isolation for the server room. Robert insisted on being there personally to oversee every step of the process. Eddie volunteered to work the weekend shift to help coordinate with the electrical contractors. After spending years learning every corner of the building, he knew exactly where all the electrical panels were located and which rooms had outlets that acted up during storms. His knowledge proved invaluable as the electricians mapped out the building's power distribution. By Monday morning, the upgrades were complete. The server room now had its own dedicated electrical circuit, completely isolated from the rest of the building's power fluctuations. Additional voltage regulation equipment ensured that even if there were problems elsewhere in the building, the servers would continue running smoothly. The real test came Tuesday night when the laundry service returned for their regular schedule. Eddie found himself back in the server room with Patricia and Kevin, watching the monitors nervously. At 10 p.m., the washing machine started up in the basement. At 11 p.m., they shifted into heavy-duty cycles. At 11:30 p.m., they began their high-speed spinning. The electrical monitors showed that fluctuations were still happening throughout the building, just as before. But this time, the server room readings remained rock steady. The isolation system was working perfectly. No crashes, no performance issues, no error messages. Kevin announced with a big grin. The servers are running like nothing is happening. For the first time in 3 weeks, the TechFlow Industries server system ran through an entire night without any problems. And it continued running smoothly for days, then weeks, then months. The financial impact was immediate and dramatic. Client complaints stopped overnight. The companies that had been threatening to switch to competitors decided to stay. New clients began signing up again, attracted by TechFlow's reputation for reliability. Within 6 months, the company had not only recovered all the business they had lost during the crisis, but had actually grown beyond their previous levels. But the most significant changes weren't measured in dollars and cents. They were measured in how Robert began to think about his company and his employees. 2 weeks after the problem was solved, Robert called Eddie into his office. Eddie had never been in the executive suite before, and he felt nervous as he sat across from the CEO's polished desk. "Eddie, I've been doing a lot of thinking since that night in the server room," Robert began. "You showed me something important about this company that I had been missing." Eddie wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but he listened carefully. "For 15 years, I've been focused on hiring the smartest people with the best credentials and the most expensive expertise. And don't get me wrong, those people are important. But you showed me that intelligence and insight can come from anywhere, and that sometimes the most valuable perspectives come from people who see things differently." Robert leaned forward in his chair. "I want to offer you a new position. I'd like you to become our Director of Operational Observation." Eddie blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, what does that mean?" "It means I want you to keep doing what you've been doing, paying attention to patterns, noticing when things don't seem right, thinking about how different parts of our operation connect to each other. But I want you to do it as an official part of your job, working with all our departments." Robert explained that Eddie would keep his current salary and benefits, but would also receive additional compensation for his new responsibilities. He would work directly with the IT department, facilities management, and operations teams to identify potential problems before they became crises. "I don't have any formal education in business or technology," Eddie said hesitantly. "Eddie, you have something more valuable than formal education. You have wisdom that comes from years of careful observation and practical experience. You think about problems in ways that our specialists never considered. That's exactly what this company needs." Eddie accepted the new position, though it took him several weeks to fully believe that it was real. His first official project was to conduct a comprehensive review of all the building's systems and operational processes, looking for other potential issues that might be lurking unnoticed. Working with the IT department, Eddie identified several other minor problems that could have become major crises if left unaddressed. A backup generator that had a loose connection, an air conditioning system that was drawing too much power during peak summer hours, a network switch that was installed in a location where it got too hot during afternoon hours. None of these issues were causing immediate problems, but Eddie's systematic observation approach caught them before they could develop into serious failures. Word of Eddie's story began to spread beyond TechFlow Industries. Robert started mentioning it in speeches at business conferences, talking about the importance of listening to all employees and recognizing that valuable insights can come from unexpected sources. A local newspaper picked up the story, running an article titled, "The Janitor Who Saved the Company." The article attracted attention from business schools, where professors began using TechFlow Industries as a case study about organizational learning and the value of different perspectives. Eddie found himself in the unusual position of being invited to speak at business events. His talks were always simple and practical, focusing on the importance of paying attention to details and thinking about how different systems connect to each other. "I never thought of myself as someone who had important ideas," Eddie would tell audiences. "I just tried to do my job well and notice when things didn't seem right. It turns out that's more valuable than I realized." The culture at TechFlow Industries gradually changed as well. Robert instituted regular observation sessions, where employees from all departments could share things they had noticed that seemed unusual or potentially problematic. The maintenance staff began reporting minor equipment issues before they became major failures. Administrative assistants started identifying process inefficiencies that were costing the company time and money. What had started as a crisis that threatened to destroy the company became a turning point that made it stronger and more resilient. 5 years later, TechFlow Industries had grown into one of the most successful cloud service companies in the region. They had expanded to serve over 10,000 clients and had never experienced another major system failure. Eddie, now in his mid-50s, had become one of the most respected employees in the company. He had his own office, though he still preferred to spend much of his time walking through different parts of the building, observing and listening. When new employees joined the company, they often heard Eddie's story during orientation. It had become part of TechFlow's culture, the idea that every person's perspective is valuable, that the simplest explanations are often the right ones, and that paying attention to details can make the difference between failure and success. Robert often reflected on how close they had come to losing everything, and how a conversation with a night janitor had saved not just the company, but had taught him a valuable lesson about leadership and the importance of listening to everyone on his team. Sometimes the most important solutions come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the person who saves the day is the one nobody thought to ask.